Okay, so today we're going to be going into the Waaaaaaay Back Machine. Now, what I like to do in this segment is we're going to be looking at horrible takes, terrible calls, bewildering predictions that went well, events that still could be in the realm of possibility as well. So I like to go back to the people that I really, really like to listen to podcast-wise or YouTube-wise, and I like to see how well their predictions lined up. And so I stumbled across this conversation with Preston Pysh's conversation with John Vallis, just came out a week or two ago. Absolutely wonderful conversation. I'll have the link in the show notes here. But Preston was saying how he's embarrassed to go back and listen, and I've been a listener of his show for a long, long time. So this goes back to 2015. And he was saying how he had his first episode back then about Bitcoin. This is before his show was about Bitcoin. It was about just investing value, investing in general, and talking about Warren Buffett and his tactics and his books and everything like that. So I was a listener and a huge fan, like I said, and I have no problem with going back and dissecting this. So I wanted to have fun with doing this, and it's not in any way, shape, or form to embarrass anybody. We all make predictions. It's just great to go back and be like, you know, is this what this guy is saying right now? Is he talking out of his ass, or is he making a lot of sense right now? Is he good at is he weighted at predicting the future, or is he weighted at making calls about what could possibly happen down the road? And I think Preston Pysh is kind of spot on this evaluation, albeit a little bit skeptical. Again, 2015, it's right around the time that he started buying. So let's jump into it right now.
They price this out of the housing market. They price this out of the education market. They price this out of the stock market. They continue to price this out of day-to-day goods. We need to take this back, and this is our time to do it.
So, like I said at the top, this is TIP episode number 30. This is their first Bitcoin podcast. So they do a really great discussion about what is money, and you can hear Preston's brain working on all cylinders. You know, he keeps a skeptical but open mind, and I think that's what opened him up to make the investment in the first place. Now, by my opinion, Stig, who's his partner, who didn't go off with him to do the Bitcoin, he continued to do the TIP show, and Preston went off and split and started doing the Bitcoin show. So you can tell Stig is not super engaged, especially at the beginning. He kind of warms up as the conversation goes along, and it ends up being a really, really great conversation. And, you know, I think he's just a skeptic, and I think this is the reason why he's separated, because I don't think he ever fully got on board with Bitcoin. But he does like the concept of having a banking alternative, especially for developing nations. So Stig was actually great at predicting this, because what did we see with El Salvador? That's exactly what happened. It's a banking alternative. 70% of the people in El Salvador don't have a bank account. So now they're using Bitcoin. So he basically makes the call of developing nations adoption and knowing that it's not quite ready for mainstream in developed nations who have a strong currency like the United States. So, but he is blown away by Satoshi, so that's another fun thing too. So he's a skeptic, but it's fun to listen to where his brain was going about the potential for Bitcoin as well, instead of just fully dismissing it altogether. So first clip I want to play is Preston talking about rampant money printing. Here it is.
And so when you go back into, hundreds of years ago, the type of money that they would always try to use was something that was very durable, something that could hold up over time. Something else that they wanted to use was something that couldn't be replicated or just, produced on a whim, like paper. And so that kind of talks to the reason why cryptocurrency has really emerged, is because you can't increase the supply of the money. So that's what they're trying to get around here, is all these governments, they're printing money through the nose. They're just printing as much money as they can, because then that drops the value of their currency. It increases their exports out of the country, which produces their GDP to go up. And so what you have is this race around the world for people to devalue their currency by printing more. And so this cryptocurrency solves that problem by stopping that, by having a fine amount, a limit, a cap, if you will, on the amount of currency that's in the system.
So as you can see there, I mean, explaining that the cryptocurrency, and I think by this he means Bitcoin, supply cap is the solution to the problem for the money printing. This is back in 2015. So pretty good stuff here. Let's move on and we can talk about the origins of cryptocurrency, of Bitcoin, through the throes of the financial crisis. So let's take a listen here.
I did this source code in 2009, which I find it kind of ironic that came right after the crash of 2008, whenever we had this financial meltdown. I thought the timing of that was pretty interesting as well.
Let's move on and we can talk about Satoshi's understanding of all different things. I've talked about this before. He's a master of a lot of different subject matter. So let's take a listen to what Preston thinks about that.
I totally agree with you. I think this guy might be one of the smartest people that I've ever come across some of his writings before. For him to understand, because he has to understand a lot of different things here. First of all, you got to understand contracts, because these are really smart contracts that are taking place. He has to understand encryption to just like a ridiculous level, which is extremely difficult stuff if you've never studied encryption before. And then you have to have this unbelievable understanding of economics, macroeconomics, microeconomics, and how exchanges take place. And this person would have had all this knowledge. I just find it, I find it a little hard to believe that it's just one person, but maybe there is just this total savant out there that just created this. It's really quite fascinating.
Here's another good one about the Mt. Gox affair and the aftermath of what happened after Mt. Gox. Obviously, this was not too long after that, and they do a great breakdown as to the implications of an exchange hack. And I've talked about that on this show as well, so let's take a listen here.
Mt. Gox, which was this internet trading site where you could buy these magic cards. You had people start trading Bitcoins there and trading them for real money. And that's where there started to be, it was basically the first open market for Bitcoins. Through the years, this is the Mt. Gox, I guess the founder of Mt. Gox, the person who was running this exchange, really had no idea what they were doing whenever they started getting this influx of all these Bitcoin people trying to trade their Bitcoins for currency. Had a huge fallout because the person mismanaged some of the exchanges. Millions of dollars were lost. I think the person might have gone to jail who was running it. I don't really know. But there was a lot of people, whenever they hear Bitcoin and they hear like the negative vibe that's associated with it, it almost all goes back to this Mt. Gox thing, because whenever the Mt. Gox kind of that company fell apart, you saw the price of Bitcoin just go through the floor, because I don't think there was really an exchange for people to trade their coins anymore. And so then that had an impact on the price, and people were just trying to get rid of them, and it was a whole fallout. So where you have a big misnomer is a lot of people thought that there was a hack or there was something wrong with Bitcoin and the software itself, but there was not. It was actually this third-party company that was basically acting as like a stock exchange of these Bitcoins that fell apart and had issues. And that was the reason that you had the major price go down.
So here's another one. I thought this was really cool because, I'm really bullish on this show, obviously, but I do like to present an alternative side sometimes when it's warranted. And I think this is a great breakdown that Stig has about the volatile nature of Bitcoin. So let's take a listen to that.
I think you will keep seeing this high volatility that you're experiencing. So for instance, what Preston was saying before, you would see it, increase tenfold only to drop to a quarter of that value today. So having a monetary system, and the whole reason for the monetary system is really to ensure stability. At least that's a big reason for that. Having a system that is not completely stable, I think that would be really, really hard. And I think it would be really hard for people to trust that system. So it's kind of like, I think, from a humanitarian point of view, I think it would be fantastic if we had Bitcoin. But before we trust it, we won't have a stable currency, and we won't have a stable currency before we trust it.
So as you can hear, he brings up a good point about the volatile nature. You know, it's going to be hard to create a world currency that is so wildly volatile. And I think the solution to this is, I think people are kind of looking at it backwards. And the reason why Bitcoin is so volatile is it's because it's priced in a broken monetary system. It's priced in US dollar or in whatever fiat currency. And so there's wild swings because of the wild swings of the valuation of the dollar. But that's not represented by the value of the dollar, because a dollar is a dollar. When a Bitcoin becomes a Bitcoin, when one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin and people start thinking in those terms, trust me, it's not going to be a volatile asset. Other things will fluctuate, especially things that are broken, like the US dollar, when we price things in Bitcoin. And I say when, I don't know exactly when, but if we are to revert back to a solid foundation, a solid monetary system, we will price things in Bitcoin. And whether that's 10 years out or 20, I don't know, but I do believe that we're going down that route, because I think there's a worldwide craving for something solid, something that lives by a code. And I think we're greatly lacking that in the world, and I am here to promote all things solid and all things moral and all things code driven. So let's take a look now about Preston's concerns for Bitcoin. I think this is super nuanced and very, very, very great insight early on that Preston had for his concerns for Bitcoin. So let's take a listen to that here now.
Now, the disadvantage that's associated, that's basically tethered to that, is the idea that you don't have some Federal Reserve that can come in here and rescue the economy if it would collapse, if everyone would have started adopting Bitcoins. And so I think that that's kind of the bittersweet piece of this, is that people like the fact that it's decentralized, but I think other people have total concern over the fact that it's decentralized and you'd have no control, you'd have no government backing on the currency itself. So if some hacker would come in and would actually have the ability to hack this system and take it down, everyone would lose all their money. It's just that simple. And so that's a huge concern. I mean, I don't think you could get a bigger concern that the whole thing could just collapse overnight. And I think that trust barrier is going to be the biggest difficulty for people to overcome.
So what they both sort of describe here is actually some of the best benefits of Bitcoin. Like, for instance, the lack of human intervention. If something were to go wrong, you know, they're painting it as a bad thing that humans can't come in and fix it. And we have to break the chains away from this way of thinking. You know, we're under this assumption that there needs to be a safety net for literally everything in this world. And I think this is the old way of thinking, and we are transitioning into the new way of thinking. And let's trust the code. The code is solid. The protocol is absolutely solid. And if we think humans can do a better job and get in there and do the right thing every single time without their own personal interests at the forefront of their decision making, we're doing it wrong. That's what the fiat system is built on. That's why the rich get richer. There is more money at the top concentrated, and it's only going to get worse. And these social, economic problems and the strife that we see in the streets today, and probably only getting worse, it's going to continue unless we find a more solid footing. So let's move on. Now, let's listen to how Preston thinks it'll actually hold up, and how it is a hardcore encryption device, and how solid the encryption is. So let's take a dive into that.
So I will say this. I think that that's the problem that they have, is for people to adopt it and to start using it because they're not going to understand it. But I do think this. I think that they've got a very good source code, and I think that it's going to be very hard for somebody to hack it. Do I think somebody could hack it? I don't necessarily know. I think it's pretty solid, to be honest with you. I would say I think it has a really strong chance of holding up. So I guess I'm optimistic on its ability to actually sustain itself into the future, just as long as computer power, the processing power doesn't, have some extreme quantum leap that we're not expecting. I think that's the only thing that could really throw it off, because then the encryption could be cracked. But right now, the encryption is so hardcore, you're not going to crack it.
And like I alluded to at the beginning of the discussion, so this is Stig and Preston's discussion about the emerging market and how they kind of call it, how the emerging markets are going to be the ones to adapt Bitcoin nationwide first. So let's take a listen here.
That might still be a lot safer and a lot better than just carrying around cash. So, to me, it's not like I carry a lot of cash, but, I have a bank account. I have a system that I trust. I think that if you live in some rural area of the world, you don't have all that security. The danger of having a hacker to hack your account, that's nothing compared to walking around with your net worth in your pocket. So I think in some developing countries, I think this might be the solution in the time to come.
And I totally agree with you, 1,000%. In fact, I think that Bitcoin is really going to get its start in emerging markets.
Great insight here about the billionaire adoption, the copycat of billionaires effect that, billionaires and people with money have on each other. They're very competitive. So what they're going to want to do is copy the best parts from each of their cohorts, take what they can and make sure that they don't get left behind. And I think that's what's happening with Bitcoin, especially since the Michael Saylor announcement. You see other billionaires glomming on to that idea, and it's only going to snowball from here. So they have a great discussion here now. Let's listen to their discussion on the PayPal mafia. Now, Preston was keeping a close eye on Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, but, this was before any of those guys were really upfront and open about it. So it's an interesting thing here. So let's take a look at what Preston has to say about that.
The people that I really am focusing on, that I'm trying to really understand their opinions, are these founders of PayPal, because I think those guys understand this space better than anybody out there, because people might not realize this, but that's one of the things that PayPal was trying to do back in 2000. They were trying to create their own digital currency to basically make it a global currency around the world. They were not successful in doing that. And so the people that I really want to focus a lot on are people like Reid Hoffman, because he was a PayPal, one of the founders of PayPal. You got Peter Thiel, who's a billionaire now that we also pay very close attention to. We did one of his books in one of our earlier episodes. And the other person is Elon Musk, who went on to do Tesla and SpaceX. He was also a PayPal. And these guys are called the PayPal Mafia, if you've never heard that before.
So what was the final conclusion for these two? Now, as I said, Stig, being a consummate skeptic as he is, succinctly, should you invest in Bitcoin, Stig?
No. Wow, that was way too short. I think that my problem with Bitcoins is that I don't know how to estimate the intrinsic value.
So what he says here, mainly it's hard to calculate its value. And I do understand that point, which is what held me off from it for as long as I did. I probably listened to this podcast in 2015 and I was like, I don't know how to value it either. So this is very, very tough. When models come out like Plan B's model, or now you have a lot of on-chain data from Will Clemente and Willy Woo, and that space is getting built out right before our eyes. It's easier to find intrinsic value and know when a certain price is below where it should be, especially as far as supply and demand go. But I do understand that point. But he did really, really, really have a closed mind about it. And I would assume that holding just a little bit of Bitcoin back in 2015 would have greatly, vastly outperformed what his portfolio performance did since that time. And I'm sorry, Stig, that's just the facts. And I think Preston would agree with me on this. And here is his answer.
So for me, I've got a little bit of a different opinion. For me, I guess every investment that I do, I look at the upside versus the downside. So the downside on Bitcoin is that it loses all of its value. Somebody hacks it or the government basically shuts it down and you lose pretty much everything in it. So the downside is huge. The upside, whenever I look at it, I think the upside is also huge. When you look at it as a currency, a global currency, let's just say you have 1% adoption across the world on Bitcoin. If you added up all the different currencies around the world, and Bitcoin would take up a 1% spot in that, that would put the value of one Bitcoin well over $1,000. Probably, I would say at like, let's call it like $10,000 is what I would think that a 1% mark would probably be. If it would take even more than 1%, then you're talking an even higher value. So for me, I see that there's a very high upper limit on the value of Bitcoin if you even have a small amount of adoption around the world. I guess for me, if I take a small position, a very small position in this, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. If you have the ability to just straight up lose it, it's almost like casino odds, I think, are probably where you're at. Like, if you're going to play roulette, your chances of winning are like 47%. So I kind of see Bitcoin in a very similar manner, but I think that the upside is very, very big. It's not like you're getting double your money. You could potentially get 1,000 times your initial investment, and that's why it kind of piques my interest. Did I buy Bitcoin? Yes, I bought a few Bitcoins. Do I recommend other people buying Bitcoins? Not really.
What I'm hearing here is that Preston wanted to understand it. He wanted to internalize it. And so in order to do that, he needed to purchase it. And this is where I'll close out. I just think it's such an important point, and I talk about this to people who don't hold any Bitcoin yet. Now, how do we understand things? We tinker. And this is the best way that I find personally how to understand things. And like I said, I bought back in 2018, and I didn't really fully understand it or grasp it. But what happened over the years was a desire to learn. And since that happened, my whole world has been blown open, wide open. So my final thoughts on this today, Preston nailed it. He didn't jump fully head over heels for Bitcoin right away. He didn't take the leap of faith, but what he did was keep an open mind, and he probably guaranteed to have outperformed his buddy Stig over that course of time. And so, what I like to think of this as a great learning experience. Now, I hope Stig took this seriously, and I hope that now he's a little bit more open to the idea. He probably still thinks he missed the boat. I don't know. Preston's never had him on the actual Bitcoin show to talk about this. That might be interesting, Preston, if you're listening. Get Stig on. That would be a fun conversation to have. But I'm going to close it out there. Thanks for joining me today. This is Bitcoin Summer, and I will see you next week.